Welcome back to Hope Survives podcast. Today we have a very special episode that I have been excited about since the day we recorded it. I have not been able to wait to get to share this with you. It is an interview with the most kindest, sweetest, most genuine, heartfelt woman possibly on the face of the planet, Lindy Boone Michaelis. Her son is a traumatic brain injury survivor, and the way that she speaks, the compassion she shares, you are going to be encouraged, whether you are a brain injury survivor or a family member or whatever brings you to this podcast today. I know you're going to be encouraged. So let's go ahead and get started with today's episode. Life can come with unexpected tragedy and loss, and that is something that those of us who have been impacted by brain injury know very well. And in those moments of suffering, it can be hard to see beyond the present moment, but there really is light on the other side. And today, that is exactly what an example that Lindy Boone Michaelis will show us. Lindy is going to share some of her family's journey with her son Ryan's severe traumatic brain injury and how they've moved forward together. I had a conversation with her a couple weeks ago. We recorded this episode and I waited to release it because she is just released her first original song called Wordlayer. And that's where the inspiration of the title of this episode came. It's called Wordlayer, speaking life, love, and hope. And that is exactly what Lindy is doing today. She is actually this daughter of singer-entertainer Pat Boone, and she grew up in Beverly Hills, California. She toured all over the U.S. with her parents, Pat and Cherry Boone, as the Boone Family, and she also recorded several albums with the Boone Girls with her sisters. One of the albums is called First Class, which was nominated for a Grammy Award. And now, many years later, she's released her song Wordlayer with her sisters singing with her, and they have this beautiful music video with her father, Pat, and all of them in the studio singing this song together. And the song was inspired by her son, Ryan. She also wrote a book called Heaven Hears about her son's journey with traumatic brain injury, and she runs a nonprofit with her family called Ryan's Reach, and they have 2 group homes for traumatic brain injury survivors. This woman is amazing. I love her, and you guys are about to fall in love with her. I'm just going to say that. So I'm so grateful that you are tuning in and listening today. You're going to love this episode and this conversation. I think we could all use some hope, especially those of us who have been walking with brain injury. I know for me this week, I am very exhausted. If you've been listening to the last couple weeks of the episode, you know that it's Brain Injury Awareness Month, and I started the month in Washington, D.C., doing some advocacy for brain injury. And as we move forward into the month, this past week, I had the opportunity to go down to Nashville for another event, and my brain is just tired. And I got a little behind in editing the episodes, and I try not to get hard on myself for that. So I'm sorry that this episode's coming out. I try to get them out Friday mornings, but this one's going to be in the afternoon, and it just is what it is, right? So give yourself grace. I think I said something very similar last week, but your brain is taking up so much energy to heal. For those who are brain injury survivors, like, you are putting so much energy just to heal and survive. So give yourself grace and speak life to yourself. As Lindy shares in her song Wordlayer, speak life, speak love. Your words have power. And today, get ready to hear the amazing words of Lindy. So let's get started. Today, I am thrilled to be here with Lindy Boone Michaelis, who is going to share some of her story with us today for Brain Injury Awareness Month. So welcome to Hope Survives podcast, Lindy.
I am so, so excited to be able to be on your podcast because I'm a big fan and admirer of yours, Cristabelle.
Aw, it goes both ways. I'm so thankful for you and I'm so grateful to have you here. So, Lindy had reached out to me last year to be a guest on her new podcast where she shares about TBIs. And we had a conversation there. We've talked on the phone a bunch of times, and I just feel such a heart connection to you. Um,
Me too.
Literally, you are going to be so encouraged by what she has to share today. Speaking to the listeners there. So I'm
I hope
so
so.
excited. So why don't we just go ahead, just introduce yourself, share a little bit of who you are.
Okay, well, I grew up one of four daughters of Pat and Shirley Boone. And so a lot of people of a certain age certainly remember who my dad is as a singer, entertainer. Grew up with three sisters, so I was part of a very tight-knit family. My parents were very, very family oriented in an entertainment environment. So we kind of always felt like we were a little different for show business folk. My best friends were my sisters, and we eventually started singing together. So we started to be harmonizing. My mom taught us to harmonize. My dad put us in his show so that he could keep an eye on his teenage daughters, pretty much. Um, so we all traveled together and recorded together. So the first part of my life was just absolutely the best of all worlds. We were a functioning family with regular schoolwork and all the normal stuff, but also got to sing and travel and make records and do some of that fun stuff until we got married and started branching out. I ended up married early and had two children, Ryan and Jessica, and that marriage did not make it very long in my 20s. I got married a second time 30 years old and had another child, Tyler. I've been married to Mike Michaelis for 38 years. We just celebrated our 38th anniversary. And that's kind of my life in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for sharing. So let's talk about your connection with brain injury. Would you share some of that story?
Yes, those of you who have been through it, you understand that you get a call or you get notified. And for me, my life is now divided into two halves. Before June 19th, 2001, and after June 19th, 2001, because everything changed. I got a call while my husband and my youngest son were on a vacation in Spain, and it was my sister Debbie calling to let me know that my son Ryan had been injured. He had fallen through a skylight and fell 3 stories. And I just kind of went into shock. I was on the other side of the planet, and she had woken me up from a sound sleep. It was 5 in the morning, and I heard this news, and my stomach cramped, and it was just hard to put it together. I knew he had fallen 3 stories, but that's all I know. I knew he had a skull fracture and that he was in the hospital. So we packed, we spent 24 hours traveling back to America and went straight to UCLA Medical Center to see him hooked up to every kind of machine. Swollen, his body had taken such a hit hitting the concrete, and his face didn't look as much like Ryan because it was just swollen and tubes coming out of everything, and he was in a deep coma and they were just trying to keep him alive. And so that entered us into the world of TBI, and we've been surrounded by it ever since. But that was the shocking start of it. And
Mhm.
I don't know how much you want me to talk about, or if you want to ask me more uh,
Yeah.
individual
Well,
questions.
people who listen to this podcast, some of them just got their injuries and some of them have had them a long time. So,
Mhm.
what would you say to a loved one in that moment while you're sharing this part of your story, right when you first found out about your son's injury? What would you say to a loved family member, loved one, if they're just starting the journey?
Well, that all brain injuries are different. And when you hear one story, it's not necessarily going to be duplicated by your story, your loved one's story. Um, you definitely hold out hope that there'll be a really fast and good recovery. But you go into this kind of land of limbo, and you don't know for a very long time what the ultimate outcome is going to be. So it stretches you in ways that you've probably never been stretched emotionally and spiritually. So our family all came together, sat in the waiting room many, many weeks. Ryan's has been a slow journey. And you hear of people who kind of come out of the coma quickly. And Ryan's was not only at least 4 months long, but even when he was deemed out of a coma, there wasn't anything much different other than his eyes would track a little bit. And so they thought, well, he's taking in some of his surroundings now, but he couldn't respond meaningfully. So that's why for us, we were a family of faith anyway. And this just took my spiritual life to a different level, kind of almost to where I kind of started all over again, saying, what do I really believe? Do I really believe what I say I believe? Because I've never been challenged in my faith like I was then. And actually, I wrote a book about it. It's called Heaven Hears, because not being a journaler up until that point, I all of a sudden needed to write. It was on the plane home. I was compelled almost urgently, almost in a panic. I need paper and pen. And I didn't have it. So my husband had to dig through his briefcase and find me some paper I could write on the back of. And I had to find a flight attendant. Do you have a pen? And it was really what was pouring out of me, or I was going to end up just having some sort of meltdown, I think. But it was more prayer. It was just my pouring out to God. And from that point on, I had to do it as I processed every day. And I'm glad I did. I'm able to look back at my journal. I recommend it. It's cathartic. It's a way to process your emotions. It's a way to remember things that are happening day to day and mark the wonderful things that happen and not forget when when there's a good day, when God meets you in a way that you recognize. And so that was part of the journey for me for a year and a half. And that ended up becoming a book down the road. I could refer to my journal, and so much of my book comes out of the fact that I wrote things down. And people also told me the weirdest thing, and I don't know how many people do it or if it's everybody, but I thought, how strange. The nurses and some of the people in the waiting room would say, take pictures. And I thought, why would I take pictures of this? This is horrible. It just seemed morbid even. I am so glad I have those pictures because Ryan has come a long way. And sometimes for people with brain injury, they want the pictures or need the pictures to help put the pieces together of what happened to them. And so that's something that people told me at the beginning that I didn't understand. And later I thought, brilliant. I'm so glad because I can look at them and see, oh my goodness, look at how far we've come. So.
Mm, that's beautiful. We'll definitely put that book info in the description of the podcast for anyone who's interested in reading it. So, Lindy, how did you guys cope with after he came out of the coma? What was the rehab like? You just said he came a long way, and I know there's no way to tell the whole journey in a 30-minute
Yeah.
podcast conversation, but can you share a little bit of a glimpse into the rehab journey process and what that looked like for your family?
Yes. At first, it was all just saving his life because he had been traumatized and broken ribs and a skull fracture and a burst spleen and so many things, just life-saving and dealing with the brain swelling, like everybody has to deal with those things. 2 weeks after, we had a meeting with the doctors, and they were on the fence whether, you know, to recommend unplugging everything or to keep fighting for everything. And we said, look, you're the medical team. We'd like you to do 100% of what you can do. We're going to pray and see what God is going to do. And so glad we made that choice. And his was slow. We were in 6 facilities over the next 10 months with him. They moved him here or there, thinking he was a subacute patient, then back into an ICU and things like that. The rehab really started at the 3rd place we were, where they had OTPT and speech therapy going on there in the hospital. Eventually, we moved him to subacute, and that rehab continued at that subacute facility where they're expecting you to be in a coma or a vegetative state longer. And the hospital is not the most appropriate place. So subacute is the step down. And that's where we started making preparations to bring Ryan home to live with us with any nursing or caregiving that we would be able to afford. We did move him home after about 10 months of being in 6 facilities, and he had home therapy. It was called Rehab Without Walls, where we live. And they also sent us speech, occupational, and physical therapy. We had things set up in our garage for him. And then we found a wonderful place called High Hopes in Tustin, California, where it was a day program all for TBI, and they were set up with a lot of different people there getting therapy. And so we could give him that kind of therapy too during the week as he got stronger. At first, he was so weakened that we didn't push him, but as he did get the ability to last longer in therapy, we could take him there as well. So they even got him in the pool. Had kind of cognitive therapy classes, and he wasn't talking yet necessarily, but he could have a word here or there and maybe whisper it and that kind of thing. So over time, I have the milestones where I got a kiss from him after 4 months, but he was still in a coma. But if you kissed him, he could turn his head and kiss you back. It was just delightful, joyous. And then heard just somebody told me he uttered a word of frustration when I wasn't around, and that was his first word. It was gosh, when something wasn't working, and he was like, gosh. But it wasn't with sound. He started to mouth words. I saw his first smile after, what was it, 10 months? And a smile came on his face. It was legit, a smile, an expression. And then I didn't hear his voice for 15 months. Then that started to come. It's slow. You hear it once and you might not hear it again for a while. And then I'd hear it again. And then it would be more frequent. Same thing with the smiles. Then we realized he could read too. And we'd hold a flashcard up and he could mouth the 1 or 2, 3 words that were on the flashcard. That was exciting. He was reading it, and we would put up a flashcard and it would say, open your mouth, and we'd say, do this. And so he read it and he followed the instructions. These were all just the happy dance days, you know. We got rid of the feeding tube at about 20 months. So he couldn't eat enough until it took that long before we could feel the confidence he could eat and drink and not need that tube anymore. And he's still in a wheelchair. He has therapy every day, but his voice is loud and he can talk a lot, and he enunciates well, and his understanding is good in the present moment. His memory, short-term memory, not good. So in a way, that used to be a real negative to me. In a way, I think it's a real blessing that he lives in this present moment and he doesn't have regret or a sense of loss. And he's very content. He's a little confused, but he's very content. And you know what? We all waste a lot of time being sorry about things in our past, or we waste a lot of time being fearful of things in the future. That's something Ryan doesn't have to deal with. And I look at that as that's a positive for him.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautifully said. Thank you for sharing some glimpses into that very difficult, long journey. So,
Mm.
what are some of the things that you've seen the most improvement with him, and things that you have seen hope come alive?
Well, definitely in communication. That was the two things that were so hard for me. As mothers, we are wired to feed our kids. And when he couldn't eat, that was that was hard, the feeding tube. But when he started to just taste food and I could see he could swallow, and those things were um, a relief. And when he finally was eating enough, his appetite is really good and he can eat. His right arm came back to life and he has the ability to, take a fork and spoon and feed himself. He needs a little help because his left hand, we don't realize how much sometimes it takes two hands to eat properly, and he just has the one. But he has his appetite, and his communication took so long. He didn't initiate speech. He could answer things, one word, little easy yes, no questions, or if I'd say, are you in pain or are you cold or whatever, he could answer me. Took 3 years before he started to initiate saying something to me. Like, can I have a bite of that? I was like, yes, because he asked me for something. So that took a long time, but that now he's just super verbal and vocabulary is amazing. And that's great because he was a communications major. He wanted to make movies, he wanted to write. And so he's a storyteller, but now at least he has his language back. He has a lot of words he shouldn't say too. And that happens a lot with brain injury. Um, he was not somebody who cursed and used, foul language, but somehow that creeps its way into a lot of people that have brain injury, and he doesn't remember he does. It's hard to have teaching moments when he doesn't remember that he does that. But that has to do with frontal lobe damage. It has to do with lack of inhibition, not being able to edit what crosses your mind. So I've had to do a lot of growing and understanding and just loving him where he is and accepting and trying not to be embarrassed if something happens in public, because that's the brain injury. And Ryan is intact. Ryan's soul, in essence, is intact. There's still some brain injury stuff that we work around. Yeah.
Yeah, I love how you said that, because I would always think like people after brain injury, it's so hard because it's like there's this fog or this filter that it's really hard to like come through, but you're the same soul, you're the same
Yeah.
heart. It just comes out in different ways and it's different
Yeah.
for every person. So I love that. Can you share a little bit of the family's journey? So siblings, family, like what was it like for all of you, and what growth have you guys seen through the journey?
Yes. At one point during our path, we were in Bakersfield at Center for Neuroskills for a long time, a year, Ryan and I. And he lived on the premises, and I got an apartment with my mom nearby so that I could be there every day except on the weekends. My mom stayed back on the weekends and we alternated when we went home. But Ryan needed to have a family member because he didn't remember where he was. So he had to have somebody that rooted him in who he could remember us, anybody from before the accident, but the new people he wouldn't remember. So that was a difficult time, but one of the wonderful guys that started CNS, Mark Ashley, explained that right now Ryan's in the center of the circle of the family, but at some point he's got to move more to the outer edges because some of the other family members are going to need to really be taken care of. And that ended up bearing out. And both of my other kids went through a lot. My daughter was only 17 months younger than Ryan, and as a sibling, they were very close. And she was strong like a rock in the beginning, but she was covering and she was trying to be strong for us and for me in particular. And so later there was a lot of melting down. Her adrenal glands were shot, and she really went through PTSD. And she wouldn't talk about it for far too long because she didn't want to be another burden. So I encourage all the family members to be very, you know, be strong, but then also take care of yourself and be honest with the rest of your family when you're going through something, because if you don't tell them, they don't know necessarily that maybe you're going through some suffering, some dark times, and it's hard for everybody to watch somebody you love go through this. And my other son went through, he wouldn't mind me sharing, went through addiction. And he was only 13 when Ryan's accident happened. And so I think he was lost when his big brother, who really was close to him and really was a role model for him, not only did this happen to Ryan, but his mother changed because he wasn't used to seeing me sad. I'm a pretty upbeat person and smile a lot. And he goes, "You don't smile anymore." And I think his suffering kind of came out and he acted out on it a few years later. So again, the wounds show up in different ways. And the next 10 years were just, a journey for all my kids and for my husband and me. Thank God I have a rock of a husband who just is the steady point for all of us. And he was able to be there for Ryan's care. He's been Ryan's conservator. He learned how to be his caregiver if a caregiver couldn't show up. But my two kids became very vulnerable, my other ones, and I praise the Lord. They're doing well now. My daughter was finally able to talk about it. And once we could talk about it, we dealt with it and we cried together. And um, my son Tyler's doing wonderfully. He's about 12 years sober and works in the field of addiction and helping others. And he's the Rock of Gibraltar, I call him, because he really is a big guy and he's a rock, and he's a miracle. They're both miracles. All of my kids are miracles. So it takes a toll on a family, but you work on it day at a time and you trust God more and more. It's like I was trusting God for Ryan, but then I realized all the things I was learning about speaking life and healing into Ryan applied to my other two kids. It took me a while to realize that we're all broken here. This accident happened, it was like an explosion happened in our family. And I did triage and I went right to Ryan. That's where the bleeding was obvious. But the other things need to be dealt with too. And I can say we are closer. I'm so close to all of my kids and my husband, and very, very grateful for that.
Thank you for sharing that. There's so much wisdom there. And I feel like siblings do get neglected. I mean, my sisters were affected a lot, and there are a lot of things that I won't share on podcasts because it's
Mhm,
personal and my family,
mhm,
but it affects the whole family. It affects everyone. And like we would always it's like there's life before the injury and there's life after the injury. And, I love your encouragement to talk about it, to open up, to, um, you know, not be, uh, push it down and push it
mhm,
away and think you just have to be strong and deal with it, because strength comes in vulnerability, more
mhm.
so than anything else, I think.
Yeah, and it gave me a chance to just assure my daughter that she was just as important and loved. And if I can't understand everything that she's going through, that doesn't matter. I want to support her and not contribute to the things that were making her feel uh, weaker. She was an athlete and a strong and she is an entrepreneur, but she just would do live television and do the scary things. And but this thing just kind of was, she met her match with brain injury and being so, close to her brother. But they have a lovely relationship when they're together. They both always made me laugh, and they're back to just making me laugh. Their relationship is just fun to observe.
Oh, oh, I love
Yeah.
that. Thanks for sharing. So, can you talk a little bit about Ryan's Reach and what inspired you to start it? And well, first of all, what is it? What
Mhm.
inspired you to start it? And what kind of work are you doing now?
Yes, my family has a nonprofit that we call Ryan's Reach, and I felt compelled, along with a friend of mine. We were just getting to meet a lot of people after Ryan was starting to get strong enough. She introduced him to different celebrities. That was her way of reaching out to do something nice for Ryan. She would call different celebrities and say, just somehow arranged meet and greets. And so we've met John Travolta and Tom Cruise and Robin Williams, and we were just open armed by all these people. And we would go, and Ryan couldn't even talk yet, but he was strong enough, and just he's a handsome guy, and just he has a certain charisma. Even after his brain injury, people just gravitate towards him. And so we would go, and we started to think, there's so much goodwill out in the world towards Ryan. We were on Larry King Live 5 times with my dad. Um, and so many emails coming in, pouring in from all over the world. It just made sense to us that this wasn't all supposed to be for Ryan's benefit. And we thought we should start a nonprofit and try to help this new community that we found ourselves a part of. And the way we started doing it was fundraising. We knew we had a platform with my dad's name and celebrity that we could do a Pat Boone golf tournament. We started something called the Dub Dash, which was a 5K and turned into a 5K and a 10K running out on the golf cart path in Dove Canyon. So it happened in Dove Canyon. It was called the Dub Dash. And that still goes on annually, but it's also a pancake breakfast. So it grew and grew into hundreds of people every year. And we took the money and we applied it towards helping High Hope's head injury program. And that was the way we spent the funds for a very long time. And eventually we realized there was a real hole in our community, and that is in group home living. There would be families who would tell me, because I would be in a support group with them, and I'd hear moms and dads go, "What's going to happen when I can't take care of my son or my daughter any longer because we're aging out of it?" And there were no group homes for younger people in their 30s, 40s, 50s. There was only homes for the elderly. And so I just felt this burden that somebody should start a group home. And finally, my husband, being a lawyer and a businessman and eventually retired, he figured out what steps need to be taken. And we opened our first group home for brain injury in 2016. We raised enough money to do it, and had our first residents. Started with 3 residents and then ended up with 4 in that home, and decided, oh, we better start another one. So we have 2 group homes, and they're full now. One's in Santa Ana, one's in Tustin. We're taking care of 9 full-time residents. We call it Ryan's Reach R&R, which stands for residence and respite, providing some short stays and respite care so that family members that are still caring for their loved one and not looking for a permanent place, they can take a break and they can bring their loved one to us for a short stay, be it a weekend or an overnight or a week or so. And they might get to travel to a wedding or take a vacation or just take some time for themselves. And so we've been doing that now for about 7 years. And that's so gratifying to watch the people in our homes start to connect and feel like a family, living in a residence in a cul-de-sac area or on a residential street home and not a facility. Even if they can't be home with their parents, we try to create as much of an environment like that as possible. And I'm praying for and hoping that there'll be more homes like this.
It just makes me cry when I hear you talk about these group homes because what a
Mhm.
need and what a beautiful way that the Lord has used what you've gone through. It's like the beauty from the ashes kind of thing where you're able to change people's lives. And, how many stories have been impacted by your willingness to step out and start this? It's just really, really beautiful. And I thank you for sharing and also for just the work you're doing. And I'll keep you in my
Oh,
prayers as well.
thank you, because it's been about 20 years since we started it. And my prayer is that it continues even when Mike and I can't be as actively involved. I think it's a very worthwhile endeavor, and the group home idea does work, although it takes people with commitment and some understanding of brain injury behaviors and things. But it does fill a need instead of them being placed in a home for the elderly, which is what was happening primarily before we were able to open. So, yeah,
And give some camaraderie for the people who've gone through brain injury to know, hey, I'm not alone in this. My
yes,
friends also have gone through this too.
yes, yeah. And I've just bonded so much with each of the different residents. It really is a way it helps me heal. Ryan's life, he was just so full of promise and felt like God was going to use him in a big way. He would tell me that. And he thought it was going to be maybe through making movies and writing. But Ryan's life is making a difference, and he lives with us. He's not real appropriate for a group home because of his behavior is somewhat disruptive when he's around people he's not real comfortable with. With us, he's fine. He's great. So we did this home not for Ryan, but I just really believed it needed to exist. And I knew it was God's idea. This does not come out of my normal personality. This was God's idea. And it was just a compulsion. We got to do this. We got to do this. And I just look at my husband, and go, we got to do this. And by that, I meant, you got to figure this out, honey. And he did.
It's the we, the you,
I
we.
know. Yeah. I'm the talker. You
I
put me
love
in
that.
front of people and I'll talk about it. But he had to kind of figure out the legal stuff and the business stuff. And oh my goodness, he's the workhorse. I'm the blabbermouth. But it takes both kinds of people to get something like this done.
Hmm. That's great. So, as we're winding down here, by the time this podcast releases, you will have a new song that came out. I didn't want to let this end without talking about
Oh,
this.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
your song is called Wordlayer. Can you explain what is the concept of Wordlayer? What does it mean? And talk a little bit about your heart behind this new song.
Yes. When I was writing my book, my publisher wanted me to have a Twitter account, and I needed to come up with like a handle for that account. And I've just made up Wordlayer. And the reason that popped into my head, just one word, but I related it to bricklayer because I look at words now in particular. I think I was kind of in spiritual training. Um, I've heard about, speaking words that are powerful, but boy, did I really take it seriously after Ryan's accident and tried to guard my words, not to speak the negative, not to speak the despair, not to speak all the problems, but to speak the positive and speak um, what I wanted to see manifested and lay it down like a new foundation, lay it down like the path forward. So for me, Wordlayer was just like I'm laying down my words so that they can become where I put my next, step forward and where I want this to lead. And so that was the concept of just combining word and layer into one word. And so when I had the opportunity to write a song with a Nashville musician, this was a gift my daughter gave me for Mother's Day. I thought, okay, at least I can contribute the title. And then I started to think, how will I explain to her what I mean by this? And I started to write, and lyrics came out in rhyme and the chorus and the verses. And so by the time I got on a Zoom call like we're doing now, I said, well, here's a good title and here's some words you can work with. And she ended up keeping all the words as is, and she wrote the melody. And then she played it on guitar and gave it to me. And she said, Lindy, I really like this song. Would you mind if I go in and record it? And she made me a demo record of it. And so I've had it for a while and eventually played it for somebody who had the ability to say, do you want to record this? Like make a real record of it with more instrumentation, and invited my sisters to sing on it. And so now in November, my sisters and I went to Nashville and we recorded this song, and we've been kind of leading up to the release of it. It's coming, I think by the time you say this is going to be made public, it's already out. But it's so fun because I grew up singing with my sisters and we made Christian albums, and we haven't recorded in a long time. So it was another blessing in my life to get to take this idea and turn it into a song, because it all comes from this journey that we've been talking about. And I believe it with my whole heart, every word that's in this song. And I hope people do take something out of it for themselves, whether they've gone through brain injury, whether they're a Christian or not. These things are true. And I think has such a broad application for everybody. So I'm excited. I'm excited that it's out in the world.
Yes, and I will play a short clip of it at the end of this episode, so keep listening for that. And you can go and stream it wherever music
That's
is
right.
available. And I think there's going to be a video on YouTube
There
as
is
well.
a video of
Okay.
the making of the song and the record. And it's under Lindy Boone,
Okay.
and it'll be on all the streaming platforms, I'm told.
That's great. I'll make sure to link it for everyone.
Thank
So,
you.
as we close, this is Hope Survives podcast. So, I always ask, what are your words of hope? So, can we do number one? What's your word of hope to somebody who sustained a brain injury? And then number two, to a family member or friend.
Mhm. Well, a word of hope for somebody who has sustained a brain injury is, for me, is that you are beloved. You are beloved no matter what has happened to you in the past, no matter what is going to happen to you in the future. You are simply a beloved child of God, and that is your identity over and above a career or anything that you've attached your value to. And so that's one thing that has been a blessing to me, is that Ryan had so much promise, what he was going to do with his life. But when this accident happened, I realized I love him no less. I couldn't love him any more than I do. And it's just because he is. And I think that's true of all of us. And it's made that so much more real. So recognize how beloved you are, and people love you for you. And to the people that are living with somebody that has a brain injury, was that the second part? Don't believe that they're finished. There's so much out there that's being worked on and developed. And Ryan has continued to make baby step progress. It's been 22 years, and I still notice things. You keep stimulating the brain, and we all have the ability to learn, whether we've had a brain injury or not. There's neuroplasticity, and we can change things. And medicine and science and all of that keeps offering new things. I'm very excited about things around the corner to try. But when they tell you a year and a half is when you'll see the most progress, that wasn't true in our case. Ryan had made a lot of progress with years beyond that in his mobility. He can't walk without help, but his legs got so much more ability to move, his ability to speak, his ability to make jokes and be funny. And there's just he's still just getting more range of motion. So don't be discouraged by what's normal. Just um, assume that all things are possible, and then speak words of life, love, and beauty into the situation. And that will help your heart too. It heals you. So that's my word of encouragement and hope.
Beautiful. I love it. So much hope. Thank you so much for sharing. And speaking of words and speaking, I'm going to play a clip of your song now and then we'll close out. So thank you so much for
Thank
being here
you.
today, and keep listening to hear some of Wordlayer.
Thank you, Cristabelle.
When your happy turns to tears and you're broken by your fears, it's so tempting to declare that all is lost. You can speak into creation and build a new foundation, laying word upon the cross. Spend some time with your Creator. Are you grateful that He made you? Do you know that you're a creator too? Your words have superpowers. They can sweeten, they can sour, and you're blessed to have the choice of what they'll do.
Isn't that song amazing? You are going to want to hear the whole song, so go check it out on YouTube. There's a music video, lyric video. You can put it on your playlist on Apple Music, Spotify, anywhere you listen to music. Check out Wordlayer by Lindy Boone. And thank you again to Lindy for coming on the podcast. Thank you for listening and for being here. I hope you were encouraged by today's episode. I hope to see you on our Zoom groups. Again, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please like, comment, rate on whatever podcast platform that you listen to. That just helps get the message out to others that there is hope. Connect with me on social media, as always, at Hope After Head Injury or my page at Cristabele Braden. And let's stay in touch. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time on Hope Survives Podcast. Bye, everyone.